Sarah thought removing her own pool would end her nightmare with Karen, the neighbor from hell. She was wrong. Dead wrong. When Karen stormed across the yard with a court summons in one hand and a twisted smile on her face, Sarah realized she'd walked straight into a trap 20 years in the making. "You have 48 hours to refill that pool, or I'll take everything you own," Karen hissed, her eyes gleaming with malicious victory. But what Karen didn't know was that Sarah had been documenting every threat, every violation, every lie. And sometimes the quietest neighbors fight the dirtiest wars. Sarah Chen pressed her palm against the cool kitchen window. Watching the excavator's massive claw tear another chunk of concrete from what had once been her backyard swimming pool, the machine's diesel engine rumbled like a sleeping giant, drowning out the morning birds and the distant hum of suburban life. After 18 months of battle, she was finally free. "Thank God," she whispered, her breath fogging the glass. The pool had been nothing but trouble since the day she'd inherited this house from her grandmother. A money pit that leaked, cracked, and demanded constant maintenance she couldn't afford on her teacher's salary. But more than that, it had been the source of an escalating war with her neighbor that had turned her peaceful life into a daily nightmare. The excavator operator, a weathered man named Jim, caught her eye through the window and gave her a thumbs up. The concrete shell was nearly gone now, leaving only a crater that would soon be filled with clean soil. By next spring, she'd have the vegetable garden she'd dreamed of for years. Finally, Sarah muttered, turning away from the window to pour herself a second cup of coffee. The kitchen felt different already, lighter somehow, as if the removal of the pool had lifted a weight from the entire house. She'd spent the morning packing lunches for her 5th grade class, but her mind kept drifting to the transformation happening outside. The doorbell rang. Sarah's stomach dropped. She knew that particular ring 3 sharp, demanding jabs that could only come from one person. Through the peephole, she saw Karen Hendricks standing on her porch, arms crossed, face twisted into the familiar expression of righteous fury that had become as much a part of Sarah's daily routine as brushing her teeth. "Don't answer it," Sarah whispered to herself. "Just don't." The doorbell rang again. 3 more angry jabs. Then Karen's voice, shrill and penetrating. "Sarah, I know you're in there. We need to talk." Sarah's hands shook as she set down her coffee mug. 6 months ago, she might have hidden in her kitchen until Karen gave up, but those days were over. The pool was gone. The source of their conflict eliminated. It was time to face this head-on. She opened the door. Karen Hendricks stood 5 feet 2 inches tall, but she carried herself like a woman twice that size. Her silver hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and her pale blue eyes burned with the intensity of someone who'd made being offended a full-time occupation. She wore a crisp white blouse and navy slacks, as if she'd dressed for a business meeting rather than a neighborhood confrontation. "You destroyed my view," Karen said without preamble, her voice cutting through the morning air like a blade. Sarah blinked. "I'm sorry, what? The pool? You destroyed it. Do you have any idea what you've done?" Karen's voice rose with each word, and Sarah noticed Mrs. Patterson from across the street glancing over from her garden. "Karen, it's my pool. It was my pool. I can do whatever I want with my own property." "Wrong." Karen stepped closer. Close. Enough that Sarah could smell her aggressive perfume, something floral and overpowering that seemed to assault the senses. "That pool has been part of this neighborhood's character for 40 years. Your grandmother understood that. She respected the community." Sarah felt heat rising in her cheeks. "My grandmother is dead, Karen, and I'm not her." "No, you're certainly not." Karen's lips curled into a cold smile. She had class. She understood responsibility. She would never have destroyed something so beautiful just because she was too lazy to maintain it. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. Her grandmother had been the kindest woman she'd ever known, and hearing Karen twist her memory into a weapon was almost unbearable. But she forced herself to remain calm. "The pool was costing me $3,000 a year, just to keep it from turning into a swamp," Sarah said evenly. "I'm a teacher, Karen. I can't afford. I don't care about your financial problems. My concern is that you've destroyed property that affects my home's value. My morning coffee ritual included looking out at that beautiful blue water. Now I have to stare at a dirt pit." Sarah stared at her neighbor in disbelief. You want me to maintain an expensive pool so you can look at it while you drink coffee. I want you to be a responsible neighbor, something you've clearly never learned." The excavator's engine suddenly cut off, leaving an eerie silence that seemed to amplify the tension between them. Jim climbed down from the machine and began gathering his tools, apparently finished for the day. "Well," Sarah said, fighting to keep her voice steady, "I'm sorry you don't like the view, but the pool is gone. I'm putting in a garden." Karen's eyes narrowed. "A garden, yes. Vegetables, maybe some flowers along the border, over my dead body." The words hung in the air like a threat. Sarah felt something shift in the conversation, a darkness that hadn't been there before. Karen's anger about the pool had always seemed excessive, but this felt different. "Dangerous? I beg your pardon? You heard me?" Karen stepped even closer, close enough that Sarah could see the tiny lines around her eyes, the way her hands trembled slightly with rage. "I've lived in this neighborhood for 23 years. I've watched it decline, watched property values drop, because people like you move in and think they can do whatever they want. Well, I won't stand for it anymore. People like me." Sarah's voice rose despite her efforts to stay calm. "What exactly does that mean? People who don't understand community standards, people who don't respect tradition, people who think they can just ... destroy things." The racism was subtle but unmistakable, wrapped in the language of property values and community standards. Sarah had heard it before, in the way Karen always seemed to find fault with everything she did, the way she parked her car, the color she'd painted her front door. The fact that she sometimes had friends over for dinner who didn't look like the rest of the neighborhood. "Get off my property," Sarah said quietly. "Excuse me," I said. "Get off my property." Now, Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish. She clearly hadn't expected such a direct confrontation. "You can't talk to me like that. I can talk to you however I want on my own property, and I'm telling you to leave." For a moment, Karen just stood there, her face cycling through emotion shock, rage, something that might have been fear. Then her expression hardened into something Sarah had never seen before. "Something calculating and cold," Karen said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "You're right, it is your property, and that means you're responsible for what happens on it." "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means actions have consequences, Sarah, and you've just made the biggest mistake of your life." Karen turned on her heel and walked back toward her house, her posture rigid with controlled fury. Sarah watched her go, a chill running down her spine despite the warm morning air. She closed the door and leaned against it, her heart pounding. The conversation had felt like more than just a neighborly dispute. It had felt like a declaration of war. Through the window, she could see Jim loading his equipment onto a trailer. The pool was gone, the concrete hauled away to be recycled somewhere else. The crater in her backyard looked raw and empty, but it also looked like possibility, like a fresh start. She had no idea that Karen was already on the phone with her lawyer, or that the real battle was just beginning. That evening, Sarah sat at her kitchen table grading papers, trying to focus on her students' essays about their summer vacations. But her mind kept drifting to Karen's parting words. Actions have consequences. The threat had been vague, but unmistakable, and Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she'd crossed some invisible line. The phone rang. Unknown number. "Hello? Is this Sarah Chen?" "Yes. Who is this?" "This is Detective Martinez with the County Sheriff's Office. We've received a complaint about possible code violations on your property. I'll need to come by tomorrow morning to take a look." Sarah's blood ran cold. "Oh, code violations. What kind of code violations?" "I can't discuss the details over the phone, ma'am, but I can tell you that failure to comply with county regulations can result in significant fines and legal action. I'll be there at 9 a.m. The line went dead. Sarah stared at the phone, her mind reeling. She'd gotten all the proper permits. For the pool removal, she'd hired a licensed contractor. Everything had been done by the book. So what could Karen possibly have reported? She walked to the window and looked out at her backyard. The crater was deep and dark in the fading light, like a wound in the earth. For the first time since she'd made the decision to remove the pool, Sarah wondered if she'd made a terrible mistake. Next door, Karen's house was lit up like a Christmas tree. Every window glowed with warm light, and Sarah could see her neighbor moving around inside, talking animatedly on TH. Detective Martinez arrived at exactly 9 a.m., but he wasn't alone. Behind him stood a thin man in an expensive suit carrying a leather briefcase. And behind him, Karen Hendricks wore a smile that could have cut glass. Ms. Chen. Detective Martinez was younger than Sarah had expected, maybe 35, with kind eyes that seemed apologetic. "I'm Detective Martinez. This is County Inspector Williams, and I believe you know Mrs. Hendricks." Sarah's grip tightened on her coffee mug. "I wasn't aware this was a group event. Mrs. Hendricks filed the complaint, so she has a right to be present during the inspection." Inspector Williams said, his voice dry and bureaucratic. He looked like the kind of man who'd never met a regulation he didn't love. "May we examine your backyard?" Sarah wanted to refuse, wanted to demand they get a warrant, but she knew that would only make things worse. "Of course, right this way." They walked through her house in single file, their footsteps echoing on the hardwood floors. Sarah caught Karen's eyes, sweeping over everything: the modest furniture, the student artwork on the refrigerator, the stack of papers she'd been grading, cataloging, judging. In the backyard, Inspector Williams immediately pulled out a tablet and began taking photos of the excavation site. The crater looked even more dramatic in the morning light, a perfect rectangle carved into the earth. "Ms. Chen," Inspector Williams said, not looking up from his tablet, "do you have the permits for this excavation?" "Of course." Sarah pulled the folded papers from her back pocket. Everything was done legally. "I hired a licensed contractor." Inspector Williams examined the permits with the intensity of a scholar studying ancient texts. "These are for pool removal, not excavation." "It's the same thing. You can't remove a pool without excavating." "Actually, no." Inspector Williams looked up, and Sarah saw something like pity in his eyes. "Pool removal permits cover the demolition and removal of the structure. But any excavation deeper than 18 inches requires a separate permit. And any excavation within 50 feet of a property line requires a geological survey." Sarah's stomach dropped, but the contractor never mentioned. "The contractor's obligations are separate from yours as the property owner. You're responsible for ensuring all proper permits are obtained." Karen stepped forward, her voice dripping with false concern. "I tried to warn her, Detective. I told her she needed to check the regulations more carefully, but she wouldn't listen. You did know." "Such thing," Sarah snapped. "You never said a word about permits. You were just angry about your view." "I was trying to protect the neighborhood," Karen replied smoothly. "This kind of unauthorized excavation can destabilize surrounding foundations. My house is less than 30 feet away. I have a right to be concerned." Inspector Williams was typing notes on his tablet. "The violation carries a fine of $500 per day until the issue is resolved, given the depth and proximity to neighboring structures. You'll also need to hire a structural engineer to assess potential damage to surrounding properties." "How much will that cost?" Sarah asked, though she was afraid of the answer. "Depends on the engineer. Probably $3,000 to $5,000. Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. She'd already spent $8,000 removing the pool. Now she'd have to spend thousands more proving she hadn't damaged anything. Plus, daily fines that would eat through her savings like acid. "And if the engineer finds problems," she asked, "then you'll be responsible for repairs to any affected structures." Inspector Williams's voice was matter-of-fact, as if he were discussing the weather. That could range from a few thousand to, well, significantly more. Karen was practically glowing with satisfaction. "I hate to see it come to this, Sarah, but rules exist for a reason." Detective Martinez had been quiet throughout the inspection, but now he stepped forward. "Ms. Chen, is there anything else you'd like to tell us about this situation?" Sarah looked at him, confused. "What do you mean? Any prior disputes with neighbors? Any threats or harassment?" Karen's smile faltered slightly. "I don't see how that's relevant, Detective. It's relevant because I've been a cop for 12 years, and have never seen someone call in a code violation quite this." Thoroughly researched, Detective Martinez's eyes moved between Karen and Sarah. "Most people don't know the specific regulations about excavation depths and geological surveys. They certainly don't know the exact distance requirements. I'm simply a concerned citizen who takes the time to be informed," Karen said, but her voice had lost some of its confidence. "Hom." Detective Martinez made a note in his own book. "And you discovered these violations. How exactly?" I researched them after I saw what she was doing." When what?" When did you research them? Before or after you called in the complaint? Karen's face was reddening. I don't see how the timing matters. It matters because if you researched the violations before the work was done and didn't warn your neighbor, that suggests this complaint might be ... malicious. Sarah felt a flicker of hope. Detective Martinez was clearly seeing through act. I don't have to stand here and be accused of... Nobody's accusing you of anything, Detective Martinez said calmly. I'm just trying to understand the timeline. Inspector Williams cleared his throat. Regardless of the motivation, the violations are real. Ms. Chen, you have 72 hours to begin the permitting process and hire a structural engineer. The fines begin accumulating as of tomorrow. Sarah nodded numbly. 72 hours. She had 72 hours to come up with thousands of dollars she didn't have, or face daily fines that would bankrupt her within a month. After the officials left, Karen lingered in the backyard, admiring her handiwork. This didn't have to happen, she said, her voice almost gentle. If you'd just listened to me from the beginning... What do you want? Sarah asked, too exhausted to fight anymore. I want you to understand that actions have consequences. I want you to understand that you can't just move into a neighborhood and change things without considering how it affects other people. I removed my own pool from my own property. You destroyed a beautiful feature that added value to the entire neighborhood. You took something away from all of us. Karen's voice was gaining strength again, the righteous fury returning. But more than that, you disrespected me. You dismissed my concerns. You treated me like some crazy old lady who didn't matter. Because that's exactly what you are, Sarah said quietly. Karen's face went white, then red. What did you say? I said, you're a crazy old lady who doesn't matter. You're a bitter, lonely woman who has nothing better to do than make other people miserable. And I'm done pretending otherwise. For a moment, Karen just stood there, her mouth opening and closing soundlessly. Then she smiled, but it was a different smile than before. This one was cold and calculating and promised terrible things. You think this is over? She asked softly. You think a few $1,000s in fines is the worst I can do? I think you've done enough damage for one day. Oh, Sarah. Karen shook her head sadly. You have no idea what damage looks like, but you will. She turned and walked back toward her house, leaving Sarah alone with the crater and the crushing weight of mounting financial disaster. That evening, Sarah sat at her kitchen table with her laptop, trying to understand the legal requirements Inspector Williams had outlined. The county website was a maze of regulations and cross-references that seemed designed to confuse rather than inform. Every permit required 3 others. Every regulation referenced 12 more. It was like trying to solve a puzzle where the pieces kept multiplying. Her phone rang, her principal. Sarah, I need to talk to you about something. Can you come in? Early tomorrow. Is everything wrong? I've received a complaint about your conduct. Something about harassment of a neighbor? Sarah's blood ran cold. A complaint from whom? A Mrs. Hendricks. She says you've been verbally abusive and threatening toward her. She's concerned about your emotional stability and whether it might affect your teaching. That's completely false. She's the one who's been harassing me. I'm sure we can sort this out. But I need you to come in at 7:30 tomorrow, before the other teachers arrive. Sarah hung up the phone and stared at the wall. Karen wasn't just attacking her property and her finances. She was going after her job, her career, everything she'd worked for. The phone rang again. Her mortgage company. Ms. Chen, this is regarding your application for a home equity loan. I'm afraid we've had to deny your request. What? Why? I have plenty of equity, yes, but we've discovered some irregularities. Regarding your property, code violations, potential structural issues, we can't approve a loan on a property that might be subject to significant repair costs. Sarah felt the walls closing in. Karen hadn't just filed a complaint. She'd orchestrated a coordinated attack designed to destroy her from multiple angles. Simultaneously, her phone buzzed with another text from the unknown number. Getting the picture yet? This is what happens when you don't listen. Sarah stared at the message for a long moment. Then she did something she hadn't done in years. She called her cousin David in Seattle. David was a lawyer, not the kind who handled property disputes, but he might know someone who did. Sarah, it's been forever. How are you? Not good, David. I need help. Legal help, she told him. Lisa Torres looked nothing like Sarah had expected. Instead of the stern, intimidating figure she'd imagined, the lawyer was a petite woman in her early 40s with warm brown eyes and a genuine smile. Her office was cluttered with case files and family photos, and she offered Sarah coffee like they were old friends catching up. Your cousin David says you're dealing with a neighbor from hell, Lisa said, settling into the chair across from Sarah with a steaming mug. Tell me everything. Sarah had prepared for this meeting by organizing every document. She'd even written down conversations from memory, including exact quotes where possible. As she laid out the evidence, Lisa's expression grew more serious. This is textbook harassment, Lisa said, flipping through Sarah's documentation. And it's escalating in a very dangerous pattern. The coordinated attacks on your job, your credit, your finances, this isn't just a neighbor dispute. This is someone trying to force you out of your home. Can we stop it? We can try. To warn you, these cases can get expensive, and they can get ugly. People like your neighbor don't back down easily. Sarah thought about her dwindling savings, the mounting fines, the potential job loss. How expensive? Depends on how far she pushes it. Could be $5,000, could be $50,000. But Sarah, you need to understand something if you don't. Fight this now. It's only going to get worse. People like Karen Hendricks don't stop until they get what they want. What does she want? To win. To prove she has power over you. Maybe to force you to sell your house. Lisa leaned forward. Wait. There was a real estate agent who stopped by last week, said he had a cash buyer interested in the neighborhood. I thought it was random. What was his name? I don't remember, but I have his card somewhere. Lisa made a note. Find it. And from now on, document everything. Every conversation, every phone call, every interaction with officials. Get a security camera system if you can afford it. And whatever you do, don't engage with her directly anymore. Let me handle all communication. That afternoon, Sarah drove to the electronics store and spent money she couldn't afford on a wireless security camera system. If Karen wanted to play games, Sarah would make sure she had evidence of every move. Installing the cameras took hours, but by evening, Sarah had full coverage of her front yard, backyard, and both sides of her house. She'd also set up motion alerts on her phone. If Karen so much as stepped foot on her property, she'd know about it. At 9 p.m., her phone buzzed with the first alert. Sarah opened the app and saw Karen standing at the edge of her property line, staring directly up at the camera. She stood there for a full minute, her face clearly visible in the infrared light, then turned and walked back to her house. Sarah screenshotted the image and added it to her documentation log. Day 3, subject conducting surveillance of security. Cameras, 9:07 p.m. The next morning brought another surprise. Sarah found a notice taped to her front door from the Homeowners Association, an HOA, she'd never heard of because her grandmother had never mentioned it. Notice of violation. Unapproved structural modifications to property at 247 Maple Street. Homeowner has 48 hours to appear before the Architectural Review Board or face fines of $100 per day. Sarah called Lisa immediately. They're trying to create multiple pressure points, Lisa explained. The county violations, the HOA, the job complaint, the credit issues. Your grandmother owned that house for 40 years. If there was no HOA when she bought it, they can't just create one and retroactively apply it to existing properties. Sarah felt a surge of hope. Really? Really? Send me any documentation you have about the HOA when it was formed. What? Properties it covers. Whether your grandmother ever signed any agreements, I'll have my paralegal research it. That evening, Sarah was grading papers when her doorbell rang. Through the peephole, she saw a woman she didn't recognize, professional dress, nervous expression. Miss Chen, my name is Beth Morrison. I live 2 streets over. I was wondering if we could talk. Sarah opened the door cautiously. About what? About Karen Hendricks. I heard about what she's doing to you, and I think you should know you're not her first victim. Sarah's heart started pounding. Some obscure setback regulation. Before we knew it, we were drowning in complaints, violations, legal fees. What happened? We fought for 6 months, sold the house for $30,000 less than it was worth because of all the issues Karen had created. Sarah felt sick. She forced you out of your home. But here's the thing: after we moved, I did some research. Karen has done this to at least 4 other families in the past 10 years. Always the same pattern. People who don't fit her idea of what the neighborhood should look like. Young families, single women, minorities. She's very careful about it. Never says anything overtly discriminatory. But the pattern is clear. Beth opened the folder and pulled out a stack of documents. Police reports, court filings, interviews with other victims. I was hoping someday I'd find someone willing to fight back. Sarah looked through the documents, her excitement growing. Here was proof that Karen's harassment wasn't isolated. It was systematic, deliberate, and potentially illegal. But a pattern of harassment, targeting protected classes, that's a federal civil rights violation. That's something the FBI takes seriously. Sarah's phone rang. Lisa Torres. Sarah, I have good news and bad news. Years ago, the good news is your grandmother never signed the covenant agreements, which means your property isn't subject to HOA rules. What does that mean? It means their violation notice is meaningless. They have no authority over your property. But Sarah, there's something else. My paralegal found something interesting in the county records. Guess who was instrumental in forming the HOA? Sarah's stomach dropped. Karen. Bingo! And guess who's listed as the president of the Architectural Review Board? Karen's husband. Close, her brother-in-law. After Lisa hung up, Sarah looked at Beth Morrison with new eyes. How would you like to help me destroy Karen Hendricks? The next morning, Sarah called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years. She spent the day driving around the neighborhood with Beth, talking to other victims of Karen's harassment. By evening, they'd documented 8 separate cases. Spanning 12 years, the pattern was unmistakable. Karen would identify a target, usually someone she perceived as different or threatening to her vision of the neighborhood. She'd find or create a violation, then use her network of complicit officials to apply pressure from multiple angles. Most victims, overwhelmed by the legal and financial pressure, would eventually give up and move. That night, she sat at her kitchen table with Beth and 2 other former neighbors, planning their counterattack. They had evidence of a conspiracy. They had proof of discrimination. They had documentation of harassment across multiple jurisdictions. We need to hit her from every angle at once, Beth said, just like she does to her victims. What do you have in mind? Civil rights complaint to the FBI. Harassment charges with the county sheriff. Ethics complaint against the county inspector if we can prove he's been selectively enforcing regulations. And a civil lawsuit for damages. Sarah looked around the table at these women who'd driven across town to help a stranger. Are you sure you want to do this? Karen won't take it lying down. She destroyed my family's life, said Jennifer, one of the other victims. I've been waiting 2 years for a chance to make her pay. Then, let's make her pay, Sarah said. Instead, she drove to the FBI field office downtown and filed a formal civil rights complaint, alleging a pattern of discriminatory harassment. She provided names, dates, documentation, and evidence of a conspiracy to deprive multiple people of their civil rights. The agent who took her statement was initially skeptical, but as Sarah laid out the evidence, his expression grew more serious. This is quite a file you've put together, he said. We'll need to investigate these claims, but if what you're alleging is true, this could be a significant case. How long will it take? Depends on what we find. But I can tell you this, SIF, we determined there's probable cause to believe federal civil rights laws have been violated. We'll pursue it aggressively. Sarah drove home feeling lighter than she had in weeks. Sarah woke up to 17 missed calls on her phone. The first was from Lisa Torres at 6:23 a.m. Sarah, call me back immediately. Something's happened. The second was from her principal at 6:31 a.m. Sarah, there's been another complaint. This one's serious. You need to come in right now. But it was the third call from Detective Martinez at 6:45 a.m. that made Sarah's blood run cold. Ms. Chen, I need you to come to the station. There's been an incident involving Mrs. Hendricks. Sarah's hands shook as she dialed Martinez back. Detective, what kind of incident? Can you come in within the hour? Am I in trouble? Just come in, Miss Chen, and bring your lawyer. Sarah called Lisa, who agreed to meet her at the police station. As Sarah drove downtown, her mind raced through possibilities. Had Karen escalated? to violence? Had she accused Sarah of threatening her? Had something happened to Karen? The police station was a maze of beige walls and fluorescent lights. "Do you know what this is about?" Sarah asked. "I have some ideas, but let's hear what they have to say first." Detective Martinez led them to a small conference room. He looked tired, like he'd been up all night, and there were coffee stains on his shirt. "Ms. Chen, I need to ask you about your whereabouts. Last night between 9 p.m. and 1 a.m., Sarah's stomach dropped. I was at home, grading papers. Why? Can anyone verify that?" "I know, I was alone." "Detective, what happened?" "Mrs. Hendricks filed a report claiming you vandalized her property, spray-painted obscenities on her garage door, slashed her tires, and left threatening messages." Martinez's voice was, "Because I've been watching her house since 11 p.m. last night." Sarah blinked. "You've been watching her house?" "Surveillance. Based on the pattern of complaints and the federal investigation that's been opened, the sheriff's department has been monitoring the situation." Martinez leaned forward. "Ms. Chen, Karen Hendricks vandalized her own property and filed a false police report. We have it all on video." Sarah felt the world tilt. She vandalized her own property, spray-painted racist bitch on her garage door, slashed her own tires, left a note that said move or die, all while wearing a hoodie and trying to disguise herself from her own security cameras. "But why would she?" "Because she's desperate," Lisa said quietly. "The FBI investigation is real. The civil rights complaint is gaining traction. She needed something dramatic to make you look like the aggressor." Martinez nodded. "She didn't know we were conducting surveillance. She thought she could frame you for escalating the harassment into criminal behavior." "What happens now?" "Now she's under arrest for filing a false police report, vandalism, and attempting to frame you for a crime." "But Sarah, this is just the beginning. People who go this far don't stop. They escalate." As if summoned by his words, Martinez's radio crackled. "Detective, we have a situation at 247 Maple Street. Multiple units responding. Sarah's address." They drove to her house with sirens wailing, Lisa gripping the dashboard while Martinez navigated through morning traffic. Sarah's phone was buzzing constantly with motion alerts from her security cameras, but she was afraid to look. When they arrived, Sarah's worst fears were confirmed. Her front yard was full of people, neighbors, reporters, and at least 6 police cars. Her house looked like a crime scene. "What the hell?" Sarah breathed. All was Karen's husband, Robert Hendricks, a man Sarah had barely spoken to in 2 years. He was tall and thin with graying hair, and he was holding a megaphone. "Cannot allow this kind of violence in our neighborhood," he was saying. "My wife has been terrorized by this woman for months. Look what she did to our property." Sarah could see Karen's house from her front yard. The garage door was indeed spray-painted with obscenities, and her car sat on flattened tires. But more disturbing was the crowd of neighbors nodding in agreement with Robert's speech. "She's trying to destroy our property values," Robert continued. "She's brought criminals into our neighborhood. She's made it unsafe for our children." "That's enough," Detective Martinez said, approaching Robert with his badge visible. "Mr. Hendricks, I need you to stop this immediately. We have a right to peacefully protest." "Actually, you don't. Not on her property, and not based on false allegations. Police report, she vandalized her own property in an attempt to frame Ms. Chen." A murmur went through the crowd. Sarah could see the confusion on her neighbors' faces as they processed this information. "That's impossible," Robert said, but his voice had lost its conviction. "Your wife spray-painted her own garage door last night at 11:47 p.m. She slashed her own tires at 12:15 a.m. She left threatening notes in her own handwriting." The crowd was dispersing now, neighbors backing away from Robert with embarrassed expressions. Sarah recognized Mrs. Patterson from across the street, Mr. Johnson from 2 houses down, the young couple with the toddler from the end of the block, people she'd waved to for 2 years, now seeing her as she really was a victim, not a perpetrator. "This is insane," Robert said, but he was talking to himself now. The crowd was gone. The reporters were packing up their cameras, and he was standing alone in Sarah's front yard holding a megaphone. Trespassing. Robert looked around at the empty yard, seeming to realize for the first time that his support had evaporated. Without another word, he walked back to his house, leaving the megaphone on Sarah's lawn. That afternoon, Sarah sat in Lisa's office, trying to process everything that had happened. Karen was in jail. Robert had publicly humiliated himself. The neighborhood had seen the truth, but instead of feeling victorious, Sarah felt drained. "How did it get this far?" she asked. "People like Karen don't know when to stop," Lisa said. "They keep escalating until they destroy themselves." "But Sarah, this isn't over. Karen will make bail, and she'll be angrier than ever. What can she do now? Everyone knows she's been lying. She can make your life miserable in ways we haven't even thought of yet." Lisa leaned forward. "But we have something now we didn't have before. We have the moral high ground, and we have evidence of criminal behavior." Sarah's phone rang. Detective Martinez. "Sarah, I wanted to give you a heads up. Karen Hendricks made bail an hour ago. She's back home." "What does that mean for me?" "It means you should be extra careful. People who've been exposed like this sometimes become unpredictable. Make sure your security cameras are working and call me if anything unusual happens." That evening, Sarah sat in her kitchen eating takeout, Chinese food, and watching the news. The story of Karen's false police report had made the local news. With Sarah's house shown on camera and a reporter describing the elaborate harassment campaign that had been uncovered, her phone had been ringing all day with reporters wanting interviews. But Lisa had advised her to stay quiet until the FBI investigation was complete. "Let Karen dig her own grave," Lisa had said. "Don't give her ammunition." At 9 p.m., Sarah's security cameras alerted her to movement in her backyard. She opened the app expecting to see a cat or a raccoon, but instead saw Karen standing at the edge of the excavation site where the pool used to be. Karen was wearing a white nightgown and was barefoot. She was holding something in her hands, a small bag or container. As Sarah watched, Karen opened the bag and began sprinkling something into the crater. "I'm on my way. Don't confront her. Just keep watching." Sarah watched through the camera as Karen continued to spread whatever was in the bag around the excavation site. When she was finished, she stood at the edge of the hole for a long moment, then turned and walked back to her house. Martinez arrived. Within 10 minutes, accompanied by 2 other officers, they examined the excavation site with flashlights, collecting samples of whatever Karen had scattered. "What do you think it is?" Sarah asked. "I don't know yet. Could be harmless. Could be something designed to contaminate your soil or prevent anything from growing." Martinez looked grim. "Someone who's willing to sneak into your yard in the middle of the night. After being arrested is someone who's lost touch with reality." The next morning brought news that changed everything. Lisa called at 7 a.m. with excitement in her voice. "Sarah, the FBI just called. They've expanded their investigation based on the false police report. They're looking into whether Karen and her accomplices have been using official channels to systematically harass people based on race and ethnicity. Accomplices: the county inspector who's been selectively enforcing regulations, board members who've been targeting specific homeowners, the real estate agent who's been making lowball offers to harassed residents." Sarah watched through her security app as Karen and her 3 accomplices approached the excavation site with shovels. Crater, where her pool had been. She was already on the phone with Detective Martinez when the first shovelful of dirt hit the hole. "They're burying whatever she put in there last night." "Stay inside," Martinez said. "We're 3 minutes out." Sarah watched in fascination and horror as the group worked with military precision. Karen directed while the others shoveled, occasionally checking her watch as if working to a schedule. They weren't just filling the hole randomly, they were layering something in with the dirt, creating what looked like a deliberate burial. Danger. She barked something at her accomplices, and they dropped their shovels and ran toward the back fence. She stood at the edge of the excavation site, facing Sarah's house, and smiled directly at the camera. Then she pulled out a cell phone and made a call. The 3 accomplices were gone. Detective Karen said, her voice carrying clearly in the still night air, "I don't think I am." She reached into the pocket of her nightgown and pulled out a folded document. Through her window, she watched Martinez take the document and examine it with his flashlight. His expression grew grim. "Sarah," he called toward the house, "you need to come out here." Sarah's legs felt like water as she walked into her backyard. The scene was surreal: police officers, floodlights, Karen standing triumphant beside the partially filled hole, and a legal document that apparently changed everything. "What is that?" Sarah asked, though she was afraid of the answer. Martinez handed her the papers. It's a foreclosure notice. Filed yesterday afternoon. Her eyes, that's impossible. I'm current on my mortgage. The liens are for the county violations, Karen said, her voice dripping with satisfaction. When you failed to obtain proper permits and pay the accumulating fines, the county placed a lien on your property. When you couldn't get a home equity loan to pay the liens, your mortgage company called in the full loan amount. And when a property owner demonstrates a pattern of irresponsible behavior, like destroying a complaint about environmental contamination, the substance you scattered last night, you're framing me for environmental contamination. Karen's smile was radiant. Prove it, Sarah realized with growing horror that Karen had orchestrated the perfect trap. The false police report had been a distraction, designed to make Sarah feel like she was winning, while Karen put the real plan into motion. Who's the buyer? Sarah asked quietly. Let me guess. You know someone at this development company? Martinez was on his radio, calling for backup and requesting an environmental team. But Sarah could see the reality in his expression. The environmental complaint would trigger an investigation that could take months. There's something else, Karen said, pulling out her phone. The part where you said I was a crazy old lady who doesn't matter and that you were done pretending. Otherwise, Sarah remembered the conversation, remembered her moment of lost temper. It had felt good to finally tell Karen what she thought. Failure to maintain your property in a responsible manner. Sarah Martinez said quietly, "You need to call your lawyer. Whatever Karen is doing, don't let her." The line went dead. Karen was holding a signal jammer, a small device Sarah hadn't noticed before. Cell phone reception can be so unreliable, she said sweetly. That's when Sarah realized they weren't just dealing with a neighbor dispute anymore. They were dealing with someone who had planned every detail, anticipated every move, and had resources Sarah had never imagined. The environmental team will be here in an hour, Sarah asked. Karen said. But I'm sure you'll figure something out. People like you always do. The racism was naked now, no longer hidden behind concerns about property values or community standards. She remembered something Beth Morrison had told her. Karen always underestimates her victims. Sarah pulled out her phone. The signal jammer only worked on cell towers, not on local Wi-Fi, including Karen's confession about the brother-in-law, the development company, and the deliberate environmental contamination. I don't belong in this neighborhood. Karen's smile widened. Finally, some sense. I don't belong here because this neighborhood deserves better than people like you. People who destroy lives for sport. You're in enough trouble already. Actually, I don't think I am. Sarah looked directly at Detective Martinez. Detective, are you still recording this conversation for your report? Yes, ma'am. Good. Because I want it on record that Karen Hendricks just confessed to conspiracy, environmental contamination, and mortgage fraud. Sarah turned back to Karen. You see, the development company purchase was contingent on the foreclosure being legitimate. Karen's smile faltered slightly. That's not, and the environmental contamination complaint becomes evidence of criminal activity. A lesson plan. Federal charges, Martinez said slowly. Your confession about the development company, your admission that you planted evidence. Property the first, still legally own, until a legitimate foreclosure is completed. Which means everything you just did was trespassing, criminal conspiracy, and evidence tampering. Now, no longer seeing a concerned neighbor, but a criminal caught in the act. And I believe the FBI is going to be very interested in how this connects to the civil rights investigation they're already conducting. Not police sirens this time, the deeper, more ominous sound of federal vehicles.